I was a police officer for 17 years. I've never been one to believe in coincidences or fabricated memories. I've always trusted the facts, the evidence. But none of that matters when a child you've never met in your life recognizes you and starts screaming that you took her. Today, I hear that scream. It was in a white room in the state shelter. The girl was 8 years old. She was leaning against the wall, with a dirty and a look that seemed old, hurt. I went in with the psychologist, as I had done so many times, but as soon as she saw me, she yelling, calling me the man in the grey car, telling me that I promised her mother would be back soon, that I was the police's friend. The started to break out immediately. The back of my neck felt cold. I stood there without reacting, looking at child, and the worst part was realizing that deep down some part of me recognized her too. From then on, my mind was never at peace. I dreaming about places I didn't remember going to. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the smell of the woods and old leather, the sound of radio blaring, the feeling of driving but not knowing where I was going. My name didn't appear in the records. There was no evidence. The doubt, that remained. And that's why today, after so much time trying to forget, I need to go back to that point where everything started to apart. Because even if I don't want to, my memory seems determined to show me what I from myself. It was a Monday, shortly after lunch, and the police car radio rang. It was a simple, they said, but when I got there, my life changed, and not for the better. There's one thing about living in a small town for a long that no one tells you. There comes a time when everything starts to seem too familiar. The tragedies, the same street, the same bar, the same faces slowly aging, as if time were too lazy to pass by. And in the middle of it all, me. A man has carried a badge for almost 20 years, and who, even though he tries to appear whole on the outside, carries a deep hole inside him, dug by the silence of a case that was never closed. My name doesn't matter now, and neither does the city. Those live in these places know that names are easily changed, but stories, they stick like mold on a basement wall. I was promoted early in the I became a sergeant after less than 10 years in the service, not for politics, but for results. Respect. Most of them knew me by my first name and thought I was the guy who got things done. The truth is that I only did what any real police officer should. Do, listen more than give orders, look more than talk, and show up even when no one called. But that didn't save me from the failure that has followed since 2013. Back then, my routine was so tight that anyone could predict my steps. Like at 6:15, the police car parked in front of the bakery until 6:50, then the patrol. On the radio, always on Channel 2 because it was cleaner. At criminal records, reports, sometimes on duty. On Wednesdays, I would take a coffee with milk to Mrs. Sonia, who lived near the police station, and she could smell death when she walked past our door. I never took it seriously. Today, I don't know if I should listen more. The city had just over 7,000 inhabitants, divided between the center, a more distant neighborhood and farms. It was the kind of place where children still played in the street until dark. And the biggest worry was a dog or a rooster crowing at the wrong time. Most incidents were fights between neighbors over fences or a disagreement couples. But that spring, something broke the bubble of peace in which and it was because of me that it was never resolved. Or at least, that's what my brain insists on me every night. Her name was Helena. She was 5 years old when she disappeared. She lived with her on a small farm at the end of Estrada do Fundão. Dad had disappeared into the world, a common occurrence around here. I remember the first to arrive when they called to say the girl had disappeared from the yard. It was 4:32 p.m. The mother was in tears, with eyes so they looked like they were going to burst. She was here. She was here until now. She repeated this as if it were a mantra, while the doll that her daughter had left on the floor. We searched everything, the pasture, the woods, the road. I called in reinforcements, dogs, that the city budget couldn't afford, but that the community pressured to do. But nothing, not a single shoe, not a single hair, not a single trace. That destroyed me more than any body ever found in a ditch, because absence weighs more heavily than presence. And because I promised myself that I let another child disappear in my city without answers, and I failed. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. I went back to girl's mother's house more often than I should have. Not as a cop, but as a man trying to sew up a hole that had already ripped to. She didn't blame me, at least not out loud. But her gaze held an that no one else would dare say, and it echoed loudly inside me. Since then, my routine has become a survival mechanism. Step was timed, every breath was heavy and measured. I needed to control something, because inside my head, everything was out of place. I started her name in places where no one else said it. Once, I swore I saw the silhouette of a girl standing near the old school. When I went to, there was nothing there, just dust and wind. But that remained. What consumed me the most was the doubt. What if we didn't look in the place? What if she was taken by someone who knew the routine of the house? Or worse, what if she never left alive? And one noticed. These questions stuck to me like smoke from a fire. Every day as I walked through the gates of the police station, I felt like was watching me, like I was the only one who still owed something to that child, because the others followed. The city only I was trapped. No one ever admitted it, but I know they looked at me differently afterward, as if my uniform had become heavier. Respect turned to distance. Smiles turned to quick nods. Even my colleagues began to avoid the subject, as if they were afraid that talking about would make her reappear, and with her, the shame of what we couldn't do. Trauma became routine, and routine armor. I began to live within a protocol. Get up, work, shut up. And every night I asked myself the same question: where is she? Deep, I think that was what kept me from asking for a transfer, or from accepting the offer from the civil police in another city. I felt that there's still something to resolve here, as if the truth was buried somewhere in those dry lands, just waiting for a closer look, or to be opened. Except you have a problem with that kind of hope. It's eating away at everything, little by little. I started to distance myself, everything that made me human. I lost people. I distanced myself from my daughter, who stopped texting me. My ex-wife telling people that I was out of sorts. Maybe I was, because everything I saw, everything I did, somehow, it took me back to that at the gate of the farm, to the doll lying on the ground, to the silence, to a mother screaming, and I standing there. And it was with this baggage, this guilt disguised as routine, that I entered that room in the state shelter so many years later. When child looked at me and screamed, something inside me broke. But that wasn't where it all began, nor was it there that the truth came out. It was earlier. It was every time I tried to bury the memory of Helena. Every night I saw her in my dreams, still, silent, with her eyes fixed on me. Deep down, I think I already knew. I just didn't want to really look. I remember the smell of the room. It wasn't what you'd expect from a shelter. It metallic, cold, like old air conditioning mixed with damp paper. A place where time seemed to move too. It was stuffy, even with the window open. The girl was sitting in one of the plastic chairs, her feet dangling the floor, her eyes staring into space. She looked too small for her age. Her hair was cut haphazardly. Her eyes were sunken. You see the kind of trauma you wouldn't find in a report. You'd have to live it. The psychologist looked at me as if asking for silence. Before saying, I nodded. I took 2 steps, and that was when everything came crashing down. The eyes slowly lifted. They stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she was trying to confirm a memory she didn't want to relive. The entire froze for 2 seconds, and then came the scream. Sharp, cutting, desperate. She curled up in her chair like a cornered animal. She began to scream, repeating a phrase that pierced my chest like a shard of glass. It was him. He was the one who took me. It was him in the car. He took me. I couldn't react. My body froze. My arms felt heavy. Cold sweat broke out on my back. And time stopped. Psychologist ran to try to calm her down. 2 assistants entered the room. One of the shelter directors appeared and grabbed my arm. "Sergeant, it's best to wait outside." I went, without saying a word, without understanding, without being able to think of anything that made sense. Outside, I against the wall and tried to breathe, but the air seemed to stick in my throat. My stomach churned, as if something inside knew a truth that I hadn't yet grasped. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at the dirty floor, with its marks from sneakers and the pieces of masking tape that had once held up signs that said, "Be strong" or "You are special." It was almost ironic. I felt like I'd fallen into a nightmare, the kind you can't wake up from. The director came back with a tense expression. "She's very shaken. He said she recognized you from somewhere, from when she was taken. She's saying you promised her mother would come back soon. That you said that she was just going for a walk." My skin went cold. I wanted to speak. I wanted to deny it. To say that I had never seen girl in my life. But the words wouldn't come out. I just shook my head, half in shock, half trying to hold back what was to tear me apart inside. They removed me from the case that same day. The chief detective, with whom I had worked over 10 years, wouldn't look me in the eye. They told me it was just a precaution, that they weren't accusing me of anything. The way everything was said, it already carried the weight of doubt. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the radio on low, through channels, as if I was waiting for some clue to come out of nowhere, a sound, a phrase, anything. But all that came was static and distant. I began to rummage through my own past. I went to the drawer where I kept my old patrol notebooks. I had a way of writing things down outside of the official reports, little details that might come in handy later. Dates, names, license plates. Even I started flipping through them, looking for any mention of a missing girl, anything that might give me a basis for understanding what was going. And then I found it. A notebook from July 18th. Fundown Road. Grey car parked next to the woods. No driver. Sound of a child coming from the opposite direction. Checked. Movement. Patrol carried out to the abandoned ranch. Nothing found. Recorded as routine patrol. I remember that day. It was raining. The asphalt was, and communication was poor. It was a peaceful shift until that call. Sergeant Mora and I went there. But we didn't see anything out the ordinary. At least, that's what I recorded. But now, something about that note bothered me. Sound of child coming the opposite direction. Why did I write this so casually? Why didn't we investigate further? Why did we abandon that, as if it were just another sound, lost in the night? From that moment on, everything inside me began to tremble. In the days, even though I was away from the case, I couldn't stop. I started reviewing old security videos that were still in the police stations. I had remote access to some files, even when I wasn't on duty. For any incident involving a grey car. I cross-referenced data, addresses, dates, and that's when a pattern started to emerge. 3 missing child in the area over the past decade have at some point involved reports of a grey car. In one case, the victim's mother said a man up offering help, saying he worked with the police. She never saw her son again. I felt the ground move beneath was it a coincidence, or was there something there that no one had connected with before? Meanwhile, the whispers. My colleagues spoke softly as I entered the police station. Their gazes carried fear or doubt. And that hurt more than any direct, because until then, no one dared to say it out loud, but everyone was wondering the same thing. What if she was the truth? And I wondered too, but for another reason. Somewhere in the dark corner of my mind, something was beginning to open up. Fragmented memories, disconnected sensations, a smell of old plastic. The of a door, the muffled noise of tires on a dirt road, everything without images, only sounds, only impressions. But this seemed mine. as I had lived and forgotten or erased it. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, sitting on the couch in the living room. Without knowing, I got there. The remote control had fallen to the floor. The TV was static and a piece of paper in my hand. A childish sketch of a car and two human figures, a child and an adult. It was the girl's. She had drawn it while she was being taken in at the one of the assistants. Not knowing that I was the car man, had left a copy of the drawing on table while I was still there. I had picked it up automatically, perhaps on impulse, but now, looking at it, I trembled. It was just a scribble, but the car, it was the same as the one I drove back then. The adult wore something that looked like a police cap. At that moment, I began to lose certainty about things. I began to wonder what else I could have forgotten, what else could have been erased, hidden, buried inside me, and why. What I had left now was an doubt, and a question that wouldn't leave me alone. What if all this is true? Have you ever wondered what you would do? You discovered that your own memory might be lying to you? I knew I couldn't trust anyone. After that day at shelter, my life became a minefield. Even without a formal accusation, the mere idea that that child could be right was enough to me on the other side of trust. I became a shadow in the corridors of the police station. I spoke to me carefully, and some, not even that, but I didn't care anymore, because something much bigger was behind that scream, something I needed to understand, even if it was alone. I began to investigate the way I had learned. When I still believed that justice was as simple, I searched through internal files, but with caution. I old accesses that, through carelessness or respect for my time of service, had not yet been revoked. The civil police system is not exactly but knowing what to look for is harder than it seems. I was not looking for a name. I was looking for gaps. Contradictions. The first of these came when I reviewed the report on the Helena case, the case of the girl who disappeared years ago. Among the pages, I noticed that the images from the security cameras at the bus station, which at the time should have been attached as part of were marked as pending, but no one ever asked for them, not even me. I called the transportation department in the neighboring city where the cameras were. An old employee named Osvaldo answered with the slowness typical of someone who owes no one anything. It took me a good 5 minutes to convince the man that I was still active. When he finally found the records 2013, he gave me the first strange answer. These images were requested by someone from the prosecution that they said they were confidential and should not be archived in the standard system. But look, the strangest thing is that this was never included as official evidence in the investigation. Promotion, confidentiality, 3 words that, when appear together, usually mean someone with more power than you wants something to go away. I asked for copies. He said it was a new line of, he hesitated, but after a few minutes of awkward silence, he sent me the videos with a warning. Don't say it was me. Footage was low resolution. It was standard footage. Passengers getting on and off. Buses up, suitcases being dragged along. But in one of the footage, I saw something that made me get up from my chair. A grey car was parked next to fence, in a corner blind to the main cameras. No one seemed to notice it. It just sat there, motionless, for almost minutes. And then, just before a bus was about to leave, it disappeared from the scene. I froze the image. I zoomed in. The quality was, but I could see part of the license plate. The first letter was D, and the second number was 4. I wrote it down, and I started to the data. It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, I continued to review the reports of the other disappearances. 3 had in common the fact that the children had described, in fragmented statements or in drawings, the figure of a man who spoke calmly. One of them even said that the uncle who took him had the voice of a doctor. This bothered me for days. I too look outside the system. I started revisiting places that had been part of incomplete investigations years ago. Clinics, nursing homes, support. And it was one night while going through scanned files from the city courthouse that I found an obscure mention of a therapeutic center in city about 4 hours away. The name Clear Wind Clinic. The curious thing is that it did appear in any state health registry. Nothing. Only a court note from 2014 where the place was cited as part of the process of a former soldier who claimed to have false memories implanted during in clinical hypnosis sessions. That gave me goosebumps. False memories, implanted. It sounds like something out of a cheap movie, I know. But when in a deep enough hole, every piece of information, no matter how absurd it may seem, becomes a thread of hope. And I needed to pull on, that I got in my car and drove there. I didn't tell anyone, I didn't even leave a note. The road was long and went through a lit part of the mountain range. The longer I drove, the heavier the air seemed to be. The trees around me had of uneasy presence, as if they were watching. I know that sounds strange. But in that state, everything seemed to be. The clinic sat high on a hill, hidden behind an unmarked wooden gate. One of the iron bars was bent. It abandoned, but there were signs of recent activity. Footprints in the damp earth, a faint light coming from within. I knocked. I waited. A lady the door, wearing a lab coat but no identification. Her hair was tied tightly, her face expressionless. "Can I help you?" "I came to find out the clinic's old records, about patients between 2012 and 2016. We don't have that kind of information accessible." "I'm an officer." I showed my ID even though I knew I wasn't on duty. She hesitated. She looked back and said, "This clinic no longer provides type of treatment. But have you answered yet?" Silence. "Who was in charge at the time?" She took a deep, then she replied, "Dr. Mauricio Lira, psychiatrist, but he passed away in a car accident. No one inherited his files. The ones were left are kept, but they are confidential." I stood there staring at his hard, pale face, feeling something twist inside me. I knew there more to it, much more. And when I left, I walked around the back of the property and took pictures of one of the rooms. Through I saw what looked like restraint chairs. Observation and a machine I couldn't identify, the kind of thing a normal rehab clinic wouldn't have. I returned home with my head spinning. The pieces, but the link was still missing. Why would a missing child recognize me as the kidnapper? Why were erased memories beginning to surface? Most frighteningly, what if I wasn't looking for someone to blame, but trying to remember that I was part of it? The line between truth and illusion, thinner than it seems. And that night, as I was reviewing the child's drawings and the videos from the clinic, new appeared in my inbox. An email with no sender. Just one sentence in the message. "You shouldn't be remembering. What would you do if someone tried to erase your own history?" I didn't want to believe it. For weeks, what kept me going was the idea that there was something strange going on, but outside of me, something out there. Dirty scheme, some conspiracy, some mistaken identity. Something that, no matter how absurd, still kept me in a safe place, that of the victim, that the investigator, that of the seeker of the truth. But that night, all of that died. I received the envelope in the mail, with no return address, legible stamp, just my name, written in old typewriter script, and a warning, confidential material, personal use. I thought was some kind of intimidation attempt. Some crazy person trying to make light of what already too serious. But when I opened it, my hands started to shake. Inside were 7 photographs. Of them looked aged with yellowed edges and dated on the back between 1993 and 1996. In 5 of them, the scene was the same. A white room, with a metal chair in the center, wires hanging from the ceiling, a giant mirror on one of the walls, and people, men, women. Some wearing lab, others in military uniforms, and in 3 of these images, I was there. It was me, younger, shaved hair, sitting in that chair, straight into the camera, empty eyes, a posture I don't recognize in myself, but that belongs to me. The blood drains from my face. I turned over one of the photos where I appeared with electrodes stuck to my scalp. On the back, handwritten Session 6, conditioning positive, T249, Alvarado Project, Dawn Project. That hit me hard. I had never heard of it. And yet, two words felt like they carried too much weight. A bitter taste came to my mouth. I sat down on the floor. My breath became shallow, as if my own was remembering before I did. Along with the photos was a folded sheet of paper with a stamp from what appeared to be a military name was barely legible. But I could make out a coat of arms and the acronym DSM. The contents were even more frightening. A clinical report describing the profiles of between 1992 and 1998. Young subjects, preferably men, with a history of obedience to authority, no family members, and most importantly, stints in disciplinary training institutions. At the bottom, names coded by letters and numbers, T241, T249, T249, me. I went back to the photograph. The bracelet on my wrist, almost invisible, showed the same number. A chill ran through my body. They spoke of experiments in conditioning and partial dissociation of memory, deep hypnosis techniques, repetitive stimuli, and the use of substances in controlled sessions, all with the aim of training unconscious agents for specific tasks. Dormant units, the text activated by external commands, with blocked memories and an absence of associated guilt. My fingers ached from squeezing paper so tightly, my head throbbed, but I kept reading. Cases present with controlled retrograde amnesia, with occasional memory lapses associated with periods of induction. Constant surveillance of agents recommended, even after the end of the active protocol. Everything there pointed to a truth that I wasn't ready to. My cell phone vibrated with missed calls. I even look at it. I spent the night reviewing everything. I used hidden networks to look for more information about Project Alvarado. I managed to old forums, leaked files, archived conversations. Most of them were conspiratorial. But among them, there were pieces that matched what I in hand. Identical images of the White Room, cross-references to hypnosis clinics. Reports of men woke up years later with fragments of memories that they didn't know were real. I started to doubt myself. I started to review my youth. The period between the ages of 19 and 21 always seemed normal, but empty. I remembered moving to the city, the course in the military police, the boarding house where I lived. But the more I tried to detail, the less I found. There were gaps, days that make sense, months with no records, and now the pieces were starting to fall into place. I began to wonder, what if, during that period, I groomed? What if, for some reason, perhaps due to psychological profile, perhaps due to error, I was used in actions that my conscious mind was aware of? What if what the girl said was true? I went back to the picture of the drawing she had made at the shelter, the grey car, the man in the police cap. The promise that Mommy would be back. It all fit together in a sickening way, and the worst part, I still didn't remember. It was like an invisible was preventing me from reaching it, like my mind had been deliberately trained not to see it. But at the same time, there cracks. Over the next few nights, the dreams came back, more vivid, stronger. They weren't nightmares, they were raw. Memories, as if I were watching an old movie I'd unwittingly been a part of. A basement, a male voice saying, "Repeat the sentence." A mirror. A block wood with numbers scratched on it, the sound of a distant horn, and a scream. I woke up with a bloody nose. I'd looked in the mirror and barely myself. The pale face, the sunken eyes, and a question that burned like acid. What else did I do? That morning, I went to my locker. I grabbed my gun, my badge, and the letter discharge he had begun writing weeks earlier in a moment of weakness. I tore it. I wasn't going to run away or stop, because if turned me into a ghost with a badge, I needed to find out who. But before that, I needed to remember. It was like walking on glass. Each cut me to pieces, but I knew I had to go all the way. The truth was no longer a hypothesis. It was a shadow behind me, present in every mirror, every nightmare. I just had to face it without looking away, even if it hurt, even if it ended me. I returned to the shelter on a cloudy afternoon. Grey sky made the place seem older, sadder. The trees around me were nearly bare, and the breeze carried the bittersweet smell of wet earth and wood, the kind of smell that until recently I would have ignored. Now, every scent. Sound was a clue. The coordinator hesitated to let me in. He said I was away, that my presence there could be detrimental to the girl's recovery. I asked for 5 minutes, not to interrogate, not to accuse, just to listen. She drew something new yesterday, he said. You won't like it. He upped the folded paper from the table and handed it to me. It was another child's drawing, but this time in more detail. A room, grey walls, a chair in the center. Beside it, a child holding hands with an adult. In the lower corner, an almost imperceptible detail, the of a mirror, and behind it 2 eyes. I swallowed hard. The girl was in one of the treatment rooms, sitting on A with building blocks. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She just stopped. She watched me with that disconcerting calm, as if she was for me to say something that would confirm what she already knew. I sat on my knees, keeping my distance. I didn't say my name. I just there, trying to control my breathing, feeling a cold sweat running down my back. And then she spoke. You still wear that smell. That hit me like a punch. I was paralyzed. That perfume, the one you said was your father's. The one in the brown, I remember it because my mother also wore perfume, but yours was stronger. I don't like it. Perfume, brown glass. That pulled me. A whirlwind of sensations hit me. The dark glass bottle, stored in a box at the back of the closet. I used to use it only on special. The last time I used it was in 2016, an after-hours call, an unregistered police car. My body trembled. Jin, you sang song, the one that talked about the star. She began to sing in a childish whisper. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I want to see shine. The same melody my mother sang to me when I was little, the same one I sang involuntarily when I was anxious, the same one I sang once without thinking during a long patrol to calm an injured child. She remembered, but it wasn't just a memory. It was proof. The images came flooding back. Fragments that my mind had kept locked behind a thick wall began to give way. The sound of tires, the dirt road, the back seat covered in a blanket, the smell of perfume mixed with gasoline, and the voice, my voice, saying, "It's a trip, okay? Your mother will meet you there." There was no anger in her eyes. There was something much worse, understanding. The kind of look only those who have survived the worst can hold. She no longer screamed because somehow she had already understood that I was not a monster. I was the link between what happened and who allowed it to happen. You didn't hurt, but you took me. You gave me a bullet. You told me not to tell. My throat got stuck. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a, "Pardon me." She didn't answer. She went back to fiddling with the blocks as if the conversation was over. And in A it was, because there in that moment everything inside me collapsed. It was no longer doubt. It was no longer supposition. It was living. I was with her. I took her, not as a criminal, not as someone who chose, but as a piece, a vector. A body obedient to commands I didn't know existed, conditioned, trained, manipulated, programmed. I got back into the car with shaky legs. I rested my on the steering wheel, closed my eyes, and let the tears come, not out of pity, not out of conscious regret, but because in that moment I fell apart. I couldn't trust myself anymore. How many other times had this happened? How many other children had seen me? How many memories still buried beneath layers of obedience and conditioning? The weight was unbearable, and in the back of my mind an ancient, soft voice repeated, "You are the way, you are invisible, you are safety." The programming was real. And now that I was waking up, someone would want to turn me off. The first sound I heard the next morning was the breathing of my own guilt. I woke up wet, with no memory of how I got to bed. My clothes were sweaty, the mattress was damp, and my eyes were burning. The alarm clock had been for minutes, but I didn't even have the strength to turn it off. I stayed there, motionless, staring at the ceiling as if it'd give me some answer, as if all the things I had done and didn't remember doing were written there, invisibly. That girl no longer screamed, but her silence echoed much louder. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from the mouth. It comes from the and. That silence now lived inside me. I went to the bathroom and looked myself in the mirror. My eyes were different. It wasn't just tiredness. It was like a part of me had died and hadn't yet understood. On instinct, I opened the cabinet and grabbed the perfume bottle. The same brown she had mentioned. I aimed my hand, and for a second I thought I was going to throw it away, but I couldn't. I put it back. I closed door. I locked the cabinet, as if it could contain everything I was. That afternoon I officially resigned from the force. I didn't make up excuse. I just said I needed it, that there was something wrong with me. The officer signed the papers in a hurry, maybe relieved, scared. I don't know. I just remember the feeling of being returned to the world as something broken, without a uniform, without a badge, I went home and turned off my cell phone. I locked the doors. I closed the curtains. I spent days inside that apartment, like a man on the of himself. Everything seemed like a simulation. The noise of the street, the sound of the wind, smell of coffee. Nothing seemed real anymore, or trustworthy. The mind was a battlefield. I relived fragments, flashes, abrupt cuts of no longer as a dream, but as outbursts. I remembered the dirt road, a song playing softly on the radio, my voice telling a child to me, an iron gate, a door opening from the inside, but never the aftermath. Never what happened after I handed over that part was still dark. I wanted to scream. You wanted to rip it out of me. But the cruelest thing was that even without wanting it, even without remembering, I was part of it, not a classic monster. One of those that hide in shadows, but something worse, a shadow created by others, shaped, trained. I came into conflict with everything I believed, with everything I stood for, the police, the system, the laws. How can I trust that now? How can I anything, if my own body could be used as a weapon without me even knowing it? I started writing everything down, in an old notebook that he kept since his time at the academy. There, without thinking about logic or linearity, I started pouring out everything I felt, names, images, smells, phrases. Sometimes I scribbled until I couldn't understand my own. Sometimes I stopped and stared at the paper for hours, trying to remember what happened, two fragments of memory. On one of those pages, I wrote a question that kept repeating itself. If I tell, will they her, or will they silence her too? Because now, there was another layer to the I knew too much. And so did this girl, this living witness. What would happen to her if all this came out? She'd been taken once. She had already been used. If I spoke up, exposed everything, would protection come? Or would the very system that had me to obey turn against her? It was in this dilemma that I sank. I tried to seek help. Psychologists, specialists, former colleagues from the force who had been through special programs. Most of them said I was exhausted. Post-traumatic stress disorder, stress, delusions of guilt. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. What I experienced was real. And the more I thought it, the more I felt surrounded. Any phone call seemed suspicious. Any car parked for too long near my house made me tense. I sleeping with a knife under my pillow. I stopped going out during the day. I was, in short, what I had feared most in old patrols. A broken man, and burdened with truths that no one wants to hear. I began to consider running away, hitting the road, disappearing, changing my name. But every time thought about it, I saw her face, small, firm, tearless, as if she had survived something greater than her own age. She hadn't run, she had resisted, and now she expected me to do the same. I don't know if it was guilt or redemption, but what I did know was that was running out. The truth was eating me up inside, and the world outside went on as if nothing had happened. It was one of those nights, while listening to the wind hitting the windows, that I decided I wasn't going to report it. Not yet. First, I would hide everything I knew, see if anyone was watching her, see if they were waiting for me to speak. If the system moved, if a mistake would be ready. But in the meantime, silence was my weapon, because this time I wasn't going to be used. Not but one doubt consumed me more and more. How many other children like her have passed me by, and I never noticed? It was 3 months without anywhere, enough time to disappear from the systems, to leave the country by land and cross 2 borders with the passport, a man who no longer existed. I didn't want to run away, not exactly. But I risked being found before everything was done, and there was no other way to ensure that the story would survive, even if I didn't survive it. The last few days before I disappeared organizing what was left of me and what was left of the truth. An encrypted hard drive with copies of documents, images, testimonies, drawings, clinic records, anonymous messages, security videos, everything. In everything with dates, names, connections, lines drawn in red like a silent obsession. This wasn't a police investigation. It was a map of madness, and me at the center of it. I sent the dossier to 4 independent journalists, people who were not tied to big media, but who had already taken down big names on their own. I used code names, secure networks, and double encryption. Each message, I left a sentence. I'm not trying to be believed. I'm just trying not to be buried in silence. It didn't take long. A week later, the article came out, not with my name, but with photos of the clinic room, excerpts from the project, profiles of other volunteers who, like me, erased. The article spread like wildfire. It exploded in the right forums. The big channels began to suspect, and little by little, more articles. A more daring journalist managed to access the internal records of the Ministry of Defense, and there was the name of the Alvarada project, classified as experimental behavioral intervention for field support. They were the cleanest words ever used to cover up hell. In the weeks, 2 important figures linked to the project were found dead. One committed suicide, the other a car accident on a straight road with brake marks. Coincidence, of course, but the independent press didn't buy it, and the pressure increased. The girl, she was taken from thee and taken to a safe house with permanent psychological support. I had no direct contact with her after that, but I heard from someone I trusted that she was fine, that she drew less, and that she slept better. I know if I was a hero or an accomplice, maybe both. What I do know is that after all this, there was no longer a place for me. Not in the city, not the country, not in the mirror. I left everything behind, name, history, face. I started over where no one knew me. A quiet village, with no past. Today I live with little. I fix engines, do small repairs. Sometimes I teach local children to fish. I never go to bed at the same. I never tell stories of what I was. But sometimes, when the wind changes, I smell the old perfume in the air. Or I hear the distance, a child humming a song I shouldn't know, and my whole body freezes, as if the past is breathing down my back again. Because, even though of those involved have been unmasked, many are still free, some powerful, others invisible, and the system knows how to heal, to forget, to erase. But I didn't forget, and you shouldn't forget either, because if one day a child looks at you and that he knows you, listen, not everything we forget was forgotten by chance. If this story kept you hooked from beginning end, it's because, somehow, it touched something deep inside you, maybe a forgotten memory, an old or just that strange feeling that not everything around us is what it seems. And if it made sense to you, It might make sense to someone else. Likes and subscriptions are the simplest ways to spread this kind of story. Stories that don't make the newspapers, but that leave their mark on the skin of those who lived them. Write the word "here" in the comments true. That way know you've come this far, that you've felt the weight of this confession, and that you're ready to move forward. Because the next video is on the screen, and the mystery that follows will shake up everything you believe about memory, identity, and what might be right before your eyes.